Hello, my name's Dave Yarrow. Welcome to this briefing about some upgrades to Probe Site Tool software. We've been working on the user friendliness of the software, and we think we've improved that quite a lot, and have also been working on the appearance, particularly of the graphical outputs end of the software, including introducing some new chart styles which will be available immediately in some flavors of Probe and later in others. This briefing is aimed at existing users of the software, and many of you have given us feedback which have driven these changes. There's also available a PowerPoint presentation version of this briefing which goes into slightly more detail. You can obtain that by contacting us through the website. These changes will be rolled out during July 2011. So during that period, if you start your software, you're likely to receive an alert to tell you that you can download and install the latest version, which will include these changes. Exactly what will be different will depend on which version of Probe you're using. I've moved us across to the graphs area of the manufacturing flavor of Probe, and the first change you might notice is there are two tabs available in the top left of the screen. If I hover over the first of those, which is called Slideshow, that gives me a menu of the different types of chart which are available to me. This list hasn't changed at this point in the manufacturing version. If I move back off the menu area, the menu disappears. I can bring it back by hovering the mouse over it again, and I can pin it in place to allow me to navigate from one chart to another, and then unpin it when I want it to disappear. The second tab is called Shortcuts. Again, I'll highlight that and I'll pin it in place. In this latest round of improvements, we've worked on the principle of making some of the graphs slightly simpler in the way that they are initially presented, and then allowing the user to add levels of sophistication as they want to, as they perhaps proceed with telling the story of this particular benchmark. So for example, on the graph itself here, we're seeing the red square, which is this survey, the business that we're benchmarking today. The blue triangle is the average of the comparison group, which is highlighted as yellow squares. You're probably familiar with all of that. In the past, the average of the whole background sample would also be visible by default, but now we give you the option to call that up when you want to call it up, as I have just done by clicking Sample Average on this menu. There are some other options available on this menu which might be familiar to you. For example, I can add a diagonal line to emphasize the line of equal practice and performance on this graph. I can add some grid labels which name the different zones of the Probe World Class grid. One here which is new is the ability to make the legend disappear, just to simplify the visual presentation of what we're seeing on screen. If I bring the legend back, I also have the option to move the alignment, the positioning of the legend, which can be useful when you are copying and pasting these graphs, for instance, to place them into a word processed report. You can produce a particular effect by moving the legend to different places. There are also some changes to the icons available at the top of the screen. So this one has been renamed. It's Comparisons. It gives me the ability to change which sector group, which comparison group I'm comparing the business with. Also, I can choose from here a reference survey. If I know, for example, that this business has benchmarked using Probe previously, I can call up that previous year's results to compare them with. We've made the fine-tune settings more accessible than they were previously by providing an icon here, Fine Tune. That takes me straight to a menu through which I could change color schemes, font sizes, the symbols which are being used, various aspects of the appearance of the chart. And there's also ready accessibility here of the switch between presentation mode and report mode. The mode that we're in at the moment, as the name suggests, presentation mode is designed to be the right sort of image to be showing on screen in slideshow type mode. There is also available a switch to report mode, which simplifies the image, makes the fonts a little larger, and generally is intended to give you an image rather more suitable for copying and pasting into a word processed report. You can of course refine the settings, font sizes, etc. through that fine-tune function. Okay, I've moved us across now to a different flavour of probe. This is probe for sustainable business. I'll just take us back into presentation mode. This flavour is going to give me the chance to illustrate some new types of chart that we've been introducing. If I come to the slideshow menu here, I'm going to start with a gap analysis chart. This is a nice example of the principle of starting with a simple chart. What we're looking at here is a range of management and support processes. The red square represents this business, the blue square is the average of the comparison group. So we're looking at initially simply at the gap between those 2 points, and we can see, for example, that there is a strength in the area of managing external relationships, but relatively speaking quite an obvious weakness in the area of managing financial resources. Using the shortcuts menu, we can add some layers of sophistication to that picture. For example, I can add a label which shows the associated scores for each of those points on the graph, and if we want to, we can look at those in sequence like this. We can add an average of the overall sample, so that would include businesses outside of our comparison group as well as those within the comparison group. So a third point appears on the chart, and again we can bring scores up like this. We have the option of adding a range of scores, the spread of scores, which are divided into quartiles. So we can see that in managing external relationships, this business is just about into the top quartile of all businesses in the probe sample, whereas in managed financial resources, it's way down in the bottom quartile. And there is a new option here called elongated, which just gives me a different appearance of the chart. Probably works quite well with this particular chart. Or we can bring it back to the more compact appearance like this if that's preferred. The other thing to illustrate here is a third tab which has now appeared called Indices Scores, and by hovering on that I can call up a menu which corresponds to the list of management and support processes that we're examining here. I'll call up one of those. The area of greatest strength is manage external relationships. So if I click here, and I'll just bring this menu with me, I can set it free by clicking on a dock undock symbol at the bottom here, which moves it to a more convenient place on the screen. So what we're seeing here is an explanation of why the index called manage external relationships is achieving the relatively high score that it is. That index is calculated drawing on 3 probe questions which are listed in the small box here, and we've scored 7 out of 10, 7 out of 10 and 3 out of 10 for those 3 questions. On the other hand, to understand why we've scored relatively low for manage financial resources, we can select that one here, and we see that for those 2 questions we've scored 2 out of 10 and 1 out of 10, which clearly explains why we're seeing a relatively low score. Okay, so this chart began by looking simply at the gap between our score and a comparison group average, and that point is reinforced through another matching chart called strengths and weaknesses, which I'll call up now. I'll immediately elongate that chart because it'll work better that way. And this is highlighting a point that we already looked at on the previous chart. So manage external relationships, relatively speaking, is a strong area where the score for this business is leading the average for the comparison group. We can see that at the top of the screen, whereas at the bottom of the screen we see the most pronounced of the opportunities to improve, where the score for this business is lagging quite substantially behind that of the comparison group average. We again might want to add some scores to this, look at those in various different modes, or we can auto scale to exaggerate the effect of the strongest strength and the weakest weakness. And finally, to look at one more new style of chart. This one is called a root causes chart. If you're familiar with Probe for Sustainable Business, you will know that this tool is influenced quite strongly by a framework of sustainability called the Natural Step Framework, which provides a rigorous and very useful explanation of what sustainability means to a business and helps the business to understand what benefits it can achieve through a focus on sustainability. This particular chart is based on one part of that framework, the part which looks at substances extracted from the Earth's crust. And the chart is showing the range of questions within Probe which are directly relevant to that particular system condition of the Natural Step Framework. At the top of the chart are the strongest questions in that subset, which have scored up to 5 and 6 out of 10. And at the bottom of the chart are those which have scored less strongly. The colour coding on this chart is significant, but I'm not going to go into it in detail now. However, one of the things we are trying to highlight is the gap between the maximal possible score, 10, and the actual score, and one way we can do that on this particular style of graph is to call up an arrow, which just draws the eye a little more to the gap rather than to the initial score for that question. So as you'll see, there are several new styles of graph. We'll be offering training for those who are being introduced for the first time to these new features of particular flavours of Probe. But for now, that's the end of the explanation of the changes to the Probe site tool. Just a reminder that those changes will be rolled out during July 2011. There's further information and lots of information on other Probe-related developments available on the fairly new website, probe-network.com. You can now follow Probe on Twitter as well, and we are very keen for all Probe facilitators to become members of the LinkedIn network and join the Probe facilitators group there. We've got some great exchanges of ideas and experiences and good practice going on in that discussion group. So thanks very much for your attention. I hope this explanation has been useful for you, and we look forward to hearing from you soon.